A blizzard swept across the Colorado mountains like it was ready to swallow everything whole. Elias Ward sat by the fire holding a cup of cold coffee when he suddenly jumped at the sound of knocking. 3 knocks, soft and shaky. Elias frowned. Who in the world would be outside in the middle of a storm like this? He grabbed his rifle, walked to the door, and cracked it open. A blast of freezing wind rushed in, carrying snow, and 3 figures shivering in the whiteout. 3 Apache women. Their clothes were torn and tattered. Their black hair clung to their faces. Their bare feet were bluish and crusted with dried blood. Their faces were hollow, eyes wide with fear and exhaustion. The oldest one, tall and sturdy, stood as straight as she could, her voice rough and raspy. "Please, let us come into your house to get warm. We have not eaten in days. Everyone has turned us away and abandoned us." Elias stood frozen. The firelight flickered across his face, a face that had known loss, and now stared straight into someone else's misery. Part of him wanted to shut the door, to stay alone in the solitude he knew so well. But then he saw the eyes of the youngest girl, wild, terrified, and starving, and his hand trembled. He opened the door wider and stepped aside. "Come in." The 3 figures stumbled in when the door shut behind them. The howling storm seemed to be locked outside and inside the cabin. All that remained was the shaky breath of souls trying to cling to their last bit of warmth in a merciless winter. The fire in the stove crackled back to life, pushing away some of the cold that had been gnawing at the wooden cabin. Elias tossed in a large log. The flames caught quickly, casting a warm golden glow on the pale, dirt-smeared faces of the 3 Apache women. The oldest one, whose name Elias would later learn was Sila, sat closest to the stove. She removed her wet blanket and gently helped her younger sisters settle in. The middle one, Nara, was trembling all over, her lips dark purple. The youngest, T, was so small and frail that every breath she took sounded like a sigh from the edge of death. Elias poured hot water and set down an old iron pot in front of them. Inside, he stirred what little he had left. Some stewed beans and broken bits of cornbread. It was the same meal he had been stretching for himself all winter. The 3 women stared at it as if they could not believe it was real. Sila whispered something in Apache. When Elias nodded, they began to eat quickly with shaking hands, as if afraid the food might vanish before it reached their lips. He sat across from them in silence, holding his cup of coffee, watching. It had been a long time since this cabin felt alive. No longer just the wind, now there were breaths, the clink of spoons against the pot, and the soft hiss of the fire. When they finished eating, Elias stood and brought out 2 thick blankets from the bedroom. He gently laid them across their shoulders. "Stay the night. We will figure things out in the morning." Saul looked up at him, her eyes strong but tired. "We will leave early. We do not want to bother you, but thank you for not closing the door." Elias said nothing. He had just noticed the dark bruises on her wrists as she pushed her sister's hair back. "Rope burns." He stood still, realizing they had not only been starving, they had been abused. As Todd drifted to sleep beside the stove, Nara spoke in a choked voice. "Our tribe cast us out. They said, 'My sister brings bad luck.' When the soldiers came, many people died and they blamed us." Elias stayed silent. Outside, the blizzard was still howling, but inside him, a different sound had awakened, the sound of compassion. Something buried since the day he lost his wife and child. He stood, added more wood to the fire, then spoke softly, his voice dry and rough like old timber. "Stay. Leave when the skies are clear." Saul looked at him for a long time, then nodded, her eyes brimming with tears. That night, Elias lay on the long bench, listening to the steady breathing of the 3 strangers sleeping by the fire. The wind still howled outside, but for the first time in years, it no longer sounded lonely. The next morning, the sky was still a dull gray, and the snow had piled up all the way to the fence. Elias opened the door, and a blast of cold air hit him, making him pull his collar tight around his neck. He had planned to wake the 3 strangers and send them on their way before the blizzard returned. The small cabin did not have enough food for 4 people, and Elias was not used to having anyone else in his world. But as he approached the stove, Elias froze. The youngest, T, was curled up on the floor, her body trembling violently. Her face was flushed red, and her breathing came in short, shallow gasps. Elias gently touched her forehead. It was burning hot. She has a fever, he said softly, looking over at Scylla. The eldest sister looked up, her eyes filled with both fear and desperation. Please, let us stay a few more days, just until my sister gets better. Elias looked at the three faces in front of him, starving, exhausted, but still holding on to their dignity. He let out a long sigh and set his rifle down. All right, but you will have to help me out. From that day on, the once silent cabin began to echo with footsteps, soft laughter, and the presence of life. And the middle sister took over the cooking, even with nothing more than dried beans, a little cornmeal, and spring water. She managed to make meals that smelled of wood smoke and made Elias enjoy eating again for the first time in years. Scylla helped him outside chopping firewood, fixing up the horse stall. Her hands were rough but steady, every swing of the axe firm and confident like someone who had spent her life in the wilderness. Elias was quietly surprised to see a woman handle hard labor as well as he did. T remained feverish, and N stayed by her side, tucking her in and helping her drink water. Elias kept a pot of warm water by the bed, and every time she coughed, he would get up and add more wood to the fire. As the day faded, the three sisters sat by the stove. Nar gently taught Ta a quiet Apache song, while Elias sat sharpening his knife, silently listening. The singing was faint but sweet, blending with the howling wind outside, creating a sound the cabin had never known before, the sound of life. When night came, Sailor tucked blankets around her sisters, then turned to Elias and spoke softly. We will leave when the storm clears. I promise, Elias replied simply. No need to rush, just get better. The firelight danced across their faces, three women who had once been cast out, now sheltered in the home of a lonely man. And in that quiet exchange of glances, something began to change slowly but deeply. Outside, the wind howled through the cracks in the door, rising in long wails like the cries of a pack of wolves. Inside the small cabin, firelight danced across the wooden walls, illuminating the faces of four people sitting in a circle around the stove. It had been 3 days since Ta's fever broke. No longer gripped by fear, she leaned against Nara's shoulder, a faint smile on her lips as she listened to the crackle of burning wood. Elias sat nearby, slowly sharpening a small knife. No one spoke, but the silence was no longer heavy. It was peaceful. It was Scylla who broke that silence. We used to live south of the mountains, she said, her voice raspy, her eyes fixed on the fire. My tribe was caught between settlers and soldiers. One night they came, burned everything. My parents were shot. They did not make it out in time. Her eyes shimmered with tears. She paused, taking a deep breath, her voice catching in her throat. They said I was cursed, that I should not have survived. We were cast out of the camp. Since then, we just kept walking, eating roots, sleeping in the snow. Nar lowered her head, and Ta gripped her sister's hand. Elias set the knife down and looked at her. The firelight reflected in his gray eyes a gaze deep and heavy with memory. I understand, he said softly. I lost everything, too. It was the sickness. My 2 little ones died in a single week, and my wife. She could not bear it. She followed them soon after. No one spoke again, only the wind outside and the quiet pop of the fire. But in that silence, something shifted understanding. Nar placed her hand on the pot of beans. Stirring gently, her voice calm. We did not think there was anyone left out there who knew what that felt like. Elias looked at her and nodded. There are too many people in the world who think pain makes you weak. But in truth, only those who survive it know what real strength is. Those words made Scylla lift her head. The firelight caught the depth of her dark eyes. And in that moment, she saw something she had not felt in a long time. Trust. They sat like that through the night. No more stories. No need for comfort. But when Scylla looked across at Elias, between two people the world had once cast aside, something invisible had formed in the quiet of bond. I am truly grateful for your presence here. If this story brought back memories of dusty afternoons and hoofbeats echoing in your heart, then subscribe to my channel. So every day we can sit together again and I will tell you another tale from the west. On the 4th night, the sky darkened all at once. The wind howled through the mountains like the cry of a wounded beast. Blasts of snow began hammering against the cabin walls, dragging in a cold that cut straight to the bone. Elias looked up from his work. The fire in the stove flickered weakly, a sure sign that a real storm was coming. He stood up, threw on a heavy coat, and called out sharply, "Sila, help me brace the door. If this wind gets any stronger, the walls will tear apart." Sila said nothing, just stood up and pulled on her cloak. The two of them rushed out to the porch, snow lashing at their faces like tiny knives. The barn door banged wildly in the wind. They fought to hold it, tying it down with ropes and nailing in boards. The wind was so fierce, every step took their full strength. Nar and Ta ran out from inside, trying to shield a flickering oil lamp. The dim yellow light shook in the storm as snow clung to their hair and their breath turned to smoke. "Over here, hurry," Elias shouted. A thunderous crack, a board from the east wall broke loose. Sila lunged forward, joining IAS to lift it back into place. In a split second, their hands pressed together on the heavy timber beam. Shudderto's shoulder, their skin was freezing, but where their hands met, a strange warmth surged up in the heart of the storm. They worked non-stop for over an hour. When the last door was finally secured, Sila collapsed onto the porch, her breath pouring out in thick clouds. Elias reached out and helped her up. "Are you all right? I used to think I would die in the snow," she said, her voice raw, her lips tinted purple from the cold. But not now. They looked at each other for a long moment. The wind still roared around them, but the cabin stood strong. Back inside, Nara added more wood to the fire, and Ta poured hot water into cups. Elias sat down beside the stove, his eyes quietly following Sailor as she wiped frozen droplets from her hair. She looked up and met his gaze. In that brief moment, there were no strangers, no caution, only two souls who had once been alone, now finding one another in the heart of a brutal winter. Outside, the storm raged on. But inside, the warmth was stronger than it had ever been, and when Sailor reached out to add another log to the fire, Elias's hand brushed against hers once more. This time, neither of them pulled away. The next morning, the storm had passed. For the first time in days, the sun peeked out, laying golden streaks across the thick cotton-like snow. The air was so still you could hear the drip of melting water from the cabin roof. Elias stepped onto the porch, his breath rising in mist, one hand resting on the doorframe. The world around him was blanketed in pure white, as if the storm had never come, but its traces remained: tilted fences, a few missing boards, and a layer of frost shimmering on the barn. Behind him, soft footsteps echoed. Sila stepped out, wearing one of Elias's heavy coats. Her dark hair shimmered in the morning light. She gazed out at the wide expanse of snow, her voice low, light as the breeze. "I did not think we would make it through the night." Elias let out a rare smile, one that softened a face weathered by sun and wind. "Every storm passes. You just have to keep the fire burning." That made Sila turn to look at him. The fire not just in the stove, but within them, that warmth slowly pushing back the long years of solitude. Nar and T came out, too, their cheeks pink from the Sunday. They laughed as the chickens cautiously stepped out of the coop, shivering. Their laughter drifted into the air like a sign winter was fading. In the days that followed, life inside the cabin began to change. Nara started tidying things up, laying cloth back on the table, and hanging bunches of dried herbs by the window for scent. Ta helped Elias care for the horses, sometimes humming old tribal songs as she worked. Sila and Elias repaired the barn roof together. They worked side by side, often silent, yet always understanding. Once when Sa slipped, Elias caught her with his rough but steady hands. She only managed to quiet, "Thank you," then turned away to hide her smile. At night, the four of them sat around the table for supper. Spoke little, just nodded when N offered more food. The cabin no longer echoed only with wind, but with the soft clink of spoons, quiet laughter, and the crackling of fire. One evening after Ta had fallen asleep in a chair, Sa stayed by the fire watching the flames. "We used to believe there was no place left for us in this world." Elias answered, his voice low. "There is. You just have to walk through a lot of cold to find it." Outside, the snow was melting slowly. And inside that small wooden cabin in the forest, something had started to grow peaceful, simple, and and so real that even the wind seemed to pause and listen. The snow slowly melted, revealing patches of damp brown earth and a small stream trickling through the field. The early spring air carried the scent of fresh grass and the quiet promise of hope. Elias and the three sisters began rebuilding the farm. Sila and Elias chopped wood and added a small room to the side of the cabin, a silent sign that they were no longer just guests. Nara planted beans in the freshly turned soil. Auntie watered the garden and tended to the scraggly chickens that had made it through the winter. Laughter, the clucking of hens, the rhythmic sound of hammering all blended together, bringing life back to the land. But then, one early morning, just as the sun crested the horizon, the sound of hooves echoed from a distance. Elias looked up. Sunlight glinted off the wooden fence as 5 riders approached. At the front was the mayor of Pine Creek along with several townsfolk. Their faces were hard as iron. The mayor pulled his horse to a stop at the gate, casting a cold, contemptuous glance toward the 3 Apache women standing near the garden bed. "Ward," he called out loud and sharp. "We heard you have been harboring savages on your land. There is no place for them here. They need to leave now." The air froze. Nar stepped back and Ta grabbed her sister's hand. Sila stood tall, fire in her eyes, but silent. Elias stepped forward and placed his weathered hand on the fence. His voice was calm, low, and clear. "They are not strangers. They are my family." A ripple of whispers stirred among the riders. The mayor scowled. "Family? Have you lost your mind? They are Apache." Elas did not flinch. "I know, but they saved this farm from the cold. They work. They bring warmth. If someone has to leave, then I leave with them." The group stiffened. No one had expected the lone rancher to stand up against the town's decree. Sailor looked at him, surprised, and in her eyes, something deeper began to take root. Complete trust. The mayor cleared his throat and spoke slowly. "If you want to keep them, fine. But Pine Creek does not feed idlers. Make the land live again. Plant, raise livestock, harvest something. One season. If it works, they can stay. If it fails, they go." Elias nodded, his eyes hard as stone. "One season. That is enough." As the riders turned and the dust of their departure hung in the air, Silas stepped closer and asked quietly, "Why did you say that? Are you not afraid they will come back?" Elias answered, his voice rough as the night wind. "No one has the right to drive my family from their home." Nar broke into tears. Ta held her tight. Silas stood still, looking at Elias for a long time. Then she gave a quiet nod. The 4 of them turned back toward the farm, where dry earth and cold wind waited for them. But this time, they would plant something more than seeds. They would plant trust and the will to survive. That April, Pine Creek had never seen a spring so full of hope. Warm winds swept down from the mountains, carrying the scent of fresh soil, wet wood, and the scattered laughter from a small farm where 4 people were turning ruin into life. Elias rose before the morning mist cleared, calloused hands gripping the hoe. He and Sila worked tirelessly digging irrigation trenches, setting fence posts for the cattle, and sealing every leak in the barn roof. Each hammer strike, each drop of sweat felt like a vow to breathe life back into the land that once stood silent. Sila in an old patched leather dress moved like a warrior. She hauled water, carried straw, her suntanned shoulders flexing under the sky. When Elias tried to help, she just smiled. "I used to climb mountains to hunt. This is easier." Elias said nothing, but the warmth in his eyes spoke louder than words. Nar and T rebuilt the vegetable garden, planting corn, beans, and squash. At night, they lit fires and sang old Apache songs. Their voices blended with Elias's harmonica, drifting across the prairie like a prayer. Day by day, green returned. Sprouts broke through dry cracks. The barn echoed with the lowing of cattle again, and the stream down the hill flowed clear, reflecting their growing smiles. One morning, with the golden sun spilling across the fields, riders appeared once again from Pine Creek. The mayor and the townsfolk stopped at the gate, surveying the land. It was no longer dead. Before them stood a living farm, corn as high as a man's shoulder, barns full of livestock, and chimney smoke curling up from the cabin roof. Elias stepped out, holding his hat, his workshirt stained with soil. Beside him stood Sa, proud and steady, with her sisters glowing in the sunlight. The mayor remained silent for a long time, then exhaled deeply. "I cannot believe it," You actually did it, Elias replied simply. Not me. All of us. Murmurs stirred among the crowd. Their expressions softened. One man tipped his hat. Another tossed a handful of seeds onto the earth. An unspoken sign of acceptance. The mayor gave a small nod, then turned his horse. They have the right to stay. Pine Creek needs people like them. Once they were gone, Saw looked at Elias, pressing her lips together to hold back emotion. So now we are allowed to live. Elias smiled a full honest smile. The first in many years, not just live together. That evening, they shared their first meal grown from their own hands. The breeze carried the scent of fresh corn. Smoke rose above the roof, and in the glow of sunset, Iaz, Sila, Nara, and T sat side by side. No one said a word. They did not need to, because at last on this harsh and wild land they had found a true home. Dear friends, in a world filled with prejudice and violence, sometimes the kindness of one person is stronger than any gun. Elias did not save them out of pity, but because he believed every soul deserves a place to belong. It was that compassion that rekindled hope in three women who had once given up. Love does not arrive through promises, as it grows in shared work in hands that bring a land and hearts back to life. It has been a true pleasure sharing this story with you, the wonderful audience of Wild West storytelling. Wherever you are, I hope joy and peace find their way to your heart. I truly appreciate each and every one of you. Tell me what you think about this story in the comments below. Hit 1 if you enjoyed it, and do not forget to subscribe channel for more dramatic tales from the wild.